All right, we have some dramatic developments in the last 48 hours. The United States is sending a nuclear emergency response team to Ukraine to lay down some radiation detectors throughout the country in anticipation that Russia might use a nuclear weapon in response to the Ukrainian counteroffensive if it is in fact successful. What you're seeing behind me here is a major oil refinery in a peninsula in Sevastopol in Crimea. Of course, Crimea is of great strategic utility for the Russian Navy. It is one of the first places that they annexed back in 2014, and the Ukrainians are hell-bent on taking it back. Now, there's been a lot of stuff that's been happening, but this in and of itself is a big eyesore. It's a win for the Ukrainians, if only in terms of the optics. Of course, it's a very apocalyptic looking scene, quite reminiscent of what we've seen back in Ohio at the train derailment. And these oil fires are very hard to contain, but the Russians did have a foam agent that was able to extinguish this fire in relatively short order. So it has been extinguished, but understand what the implications of this are. We are currently on the warpath to World War III. Poland today has seized part of the Russian embassy. Okay, the Russians are calling this a violation of the Geneva Convention, and this no doubt is going to bring all sorts of reprisals. They've already had threats levied against them by the former Russian president, the one and only Dmitry Medvedev, who says that basically Poland should be effectively wiped off the map and that they will exterminate them with extreme prejudice. So it's not looking good in terms of de-escalation of this conflict. That's just but one of the many things that has transpired. There was a testimony given by a U.S. general. I believe it was at a European House Committee meeting that was discussing matters of NATO military, and he had said that the Russian activity under the water, their Arctic activity, their Atlantic activity, their nuclear submarine activity has ratcheted up, and that this was of great concern because this indicates that in spite of any losses that they might be occurring on the Ukrainian front, the Russian military is in fact stronger than before the war started, and that this massive deployment of nuclear submarines was a testament to this. So we're going to be talking about that and other things today on the channel. The Putin assassination attempt, although denied by the Kremlin as being hyped up by a German tabloid called Bild, well, this tabloid is not really a tabloid. In fact, they just interviewed Boris Pistorius, who is Germany's defense minister. So I doubt that the German defense minister would give an interview to a strictly tabloidal news agency. It's funny because a lot of the Russian apologist media like Zero Hedge will come on and reiterate the Kremlin's view of this, that this wasn't in fact an assassination attempt of Vladimir Putin. However, they really are very selective with who they call a tabloid, because this is a news agency. I'm talking about Zero Hedge, if you can even call it that. They quote the Daily Mail all the time, and the Daily Mail has always been considered, for the most part, a tabloidal news agency. Anyways, Bild is not a tabloid. In fact, it has been confirmed that a drone loaded to the nines with around 17 kilos of C4 was intended for a location that Putin was bound to visit right around the time when that drone was taken down, likely by some sort of electronic warfare device. So this is very serious. There's speculation as to who is behind the assassination. Was it the Ukrainian secret services, as was suggested by the German Bild article? Or was it rogue elements within the Ukrainian military? There are even people saying that it might have been elements, defectors within Russia who wanted to do this. Of course, the same people who said that, Nord Stream, the Russians did that to themselves. I imagine that if Moscow got nuked, that there'd be people saying that it was the Russians who did it. So we have to really be very, very skeptical right now of every single thing all kinds of media that's coming out of this situation. Nothing can be trusted at this point in time. As I said, I showed you the apocalyptic scene at Sevastopol. That is something out of a movie. We have Russia mounting guns on several of the nuclear reactors because this is likely direction in which Ukraine will be staging their counteroffensive from, and Poland has effectively declared war on Russia's embassy there, so we can expect a mass expulsion of diplomats. And guys, when this happens, there's a reason why Poland is being built up militarily in the way that it is and pledging to be one of Europe's largest militaries. Now, they are very concerned that if and when, like whatever ruse Russia is up to right now by misdirecting the Ukrainians in Crimea, by moving whole military bases. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. But there's a lot of concern that the Russians are now going to take the entire country of Ukraine. And when they do, of course, they're going to be smack dab on the border of Poland. And that's when the war with NATO is going to begin. There's so many different theories being thrown around. Will Poland unify with Ukraine? And then will that be how Ukraine is absorbed within NATO to evoke Article 5, or will Poland act independently, thus not warranting NATO to come into the conflict, keeping it on the conventional level? But understand the timeline of events. The United States Nuclear Emergency Response Team is in Ukraine laying down radiation sensors in anticipation of Russia using nuclear weapons. There's a lot of people who have a very short-term memory. In fact, the majority of people, this is human nature, this is human psychology. Even the most potent preppers amongst us. And this is why I always, whenever somebody comes to me and says, hey man, you really motivated me to prepare, I've done this, and they're really excited and overly exuberant about preparedness, those same people tend to be the ones when nothing happens immediately, all of a sudden they're like, oh, like they go in the complete opposite direction and they just rationalize it in their mind that, okay, I guess nothing has happened, so nothing can happen. This is classic normalcy bias. In fact, I had a friend yesterday, we're shooting a video, and she was talking about how, you know, she doesn't think anything bad could ever happen because in her recent memory, in spite of the fact that she was one of these people who expeditiously prepared, quickly and out of panic almost, and when nothing happened immediately, all of a sudden, the prospect of things happening was very low, which is not to say they're not still prepared, but perhaps now, forgotten how quickly these things can happen. And it's not even so much the event itself that will happen. Even if there is an isolated nuclear incident anywhere in the world at this point, the amount of panic that will be generated by that could itself be a self-fulfilling prophecy of sorts when it comes to the unfolding of SHTF. That in itself, the panic triggered, may in fact be the domino that causes the whole thing to fall and not the actual event in itself. So what I mean is, a nuclear weapon is detonated, people start to panic, and in that hysteria, our government does something, that only exacerbates the problem as opposed to minimizing it. And then of course, if you detonate a nuclear weapon anywhere on this planet right now, the panic that ensues, the panic buying, it's going to have a couple effects. It's going to lead to massive inflation because, everybody's going to be clamoring for the same things. But it's also going to deplete a lot of resources, okay? So you're not going to be able to get certain things. And in that hysteria and panic, it exacerbates all other problems that are tied to geopolitical issues, be they financial, trade wars, etc. There has been a U.S. general's warning about the Russian naval presence in the Arctic and in the Atlantic. We're going to talk about that. Chinese influence has exploded, and trade. We're going to show you an interactive GIF, I guess it is called, that shows just how China's influence has grown over the years. And we're going to talk about how much of a lie New York's fallout shelters were and how ill-prepared we are to actually endure a nuclear crisis, which is not the case in many other places around the world. So this U.S. General, General Christopher Cavoli, when testifying at a, or not testifying, but giving a presentation at the House Committee in Europe, said that much of the Russian military, and this is paraphrased, has not been negatively impacted by this conflict despite Russia's supposed losses. Their submarine patrols into the Atlantic are higher than usual despite their efforts in Ukraine. Basically saying that the Russian military is bigger today than before the invasion. Okay, this is very important to understand. We interviewed Peter Vincent Fry before his untimely passing a little over a year ago when this whole thing was started. And he said that it's very likely that Russia's strategy is very long-term. And I would encourage people to go back and watch this video that we did with him, because in my opinion, this is one of the most prescient videos on this topic thus far. I think that everything he is saying is playing out right before our eyes, that a lot of these maneuvers that we're seeing with the Russians are very, very long game, and they're not reacting, okay? They're playing chess, and I've been saying this all along. Yes, they've lost a lot of equipment. They've arguably lost a lot of troops. The numbers, of course, are varied from anywhere from 12,000 to hundreds of thousands, okay? But we must be very, very careful. Be very, very careful with our assessment of Russia's military capabilities at this point in time, because there's a reason why Kiev is still standing. Now, the U.S. has wired Ukraine with radiation sensors in order to detect nuclear blasts. I wasn't familiar with this nest. This looked like something out of the Fallout video game, if you guys ever played that. Nuclear Emergency Support Team, shadowy unit of atomic experts run by the security agency, is working with Ukraine to deploy radiation sensors, train personnel, monitor data, and warn of deadly radiation. Ukraine has been prepping CBRN equipment for a long time, and of course the U.S. procured acute radiation sickness medication, a very large amount of it last year at the, I was going to say the peak of this crisis, but I don't think we've seen the real peak of the crisis just yet. But the fact that they're doing this now, and it's not even really being reported on. This is from the New York Times, so this is open source intelligence. I don't have special connections. I do know some people that are maybe a little bit closer to the problem and rub shoulders with certain people. But regardless, I would never disclose any information that was classified on this channel. So all we're doing is we're just trying to put all the pieces together. We're paying attention to the timeline as these things are unfolding and just using common sense in order to assess what the next likely step might be. And we can see that this is a situation in which if Ukraine loses, there is going to be an escalation, and if Ukraine wins, there is going to be an escalation. So in a situation like that, you could almost bet that things are going to get worse. I mean, regardless of what the outcome might be, unless you have a stalemate, unless you have a failed Ukrainian counteroffensive that is stopped in its tracks, and then there is no other alternative for them to make some concessions. Now, the U.S. media has been paying less attention to this issue, as if to almost slowly back out the door and act as though, you know, everything that they've been saying for the past year wasn't incorrect, perhaps getting us ready to accept defeat on this front, which is why the Poles have this grand scheme of being the largest military in Europe, so they can then take the place of Ukraine as being the front line. And there is rumors that they will merge with Western Ukraine in some capacity. In fact, Zelensky has outright said that there will be no borders between Poland and Ukraine in the future. When you consider that there's, 5 million immigrants that went from Ukraine to Poland, so it's going to be an easy situation to harmonize. Now, This is concerning on the topic of Poland. They've seized a embassy school, and they have, I think, until 7 o'clock tonight to get out of there. Dmitry Medvedev responds to this and says, "I see no point in maintaining diplomatic relations with Poland. This state must not exist for us while there is no one but Russophobes in power, and Ukraine is full of Polish mercenaries who should be ruthlessly exterminated like stinky rats." Poland at the forefront of NATO, and we're using words like extermination. Guys, do not relent in your preparedness. I know it's very easy to succumb to normalcy bias. I know it's very easy to be optimistic and just to presume that human rationality will prevail in terms of mediating this conflict. But much like a divorce or a relationship that you were in that you thought could have been salvageable, there's just things that aren't going to work, no matter how much of an idealist you are. And this could be one of those untenable situations that we need to be mindful of. So RT, Russia Today, is reporting that they don't think that this drone assassination claim has any legitimacy. You have a drone loaded to the nines with C4 found around a region that Putin was intended to visit on that day. So that's all you need. Case closed. The real question is, who done it? That is the real question. And the same German news agency that reported it, that everybody's saying, everybody in the alt media is saying, oh, that's just a tabloid. Well, they just interviewed Boris Pistorius. You don't get an interview like that if you don't have some legitimacy and credibility as a media agency, okay? So just keep that in mind. What else do we have to talk about? There's these weird accusations of nuclear testing right now. Both the United States and Russia are making these claims that the other side is preparing to do a nuclear weapons test. So just, don't be surprised if that happens. What you're seeing here up top with all these little swords, that's just different places where Russia is preparing in the Arctic. Russia views as prime importance the Arctic regions. And I know this map doesn't really show it, but just remember, we're just up here, okay? So the way the crow flies anyways. Because the Earth is in fact round. Yes. Did I just lose a few subscribers? Good, because if you think the Earth is flat, you are stupid. I'm just going to outright say it. Why New York's fallout shelters won't protect you from attack. Apparently there's still these fallout shines around New York City. And this was, there was no hope of these things ever protecting people in New York from fallout, protecting them from the blast. This was all a false sense of security. It was duck and cover. And nothing has changed to this day. So just understand we have incompetent leaders, and 90% of the population succumbs to the normalcy bias. You have to be a little bit unhinged to be a prepper. And this is the problem with preppers, okay, is because it almost necessitates that you are abnormal. You are abnormal in the sense that you're ahead of the curve somewhat. What is that old saying, fine line between insanity and genius? And it's very true, which is why you have so many people who are a little out to lunch in this community, to be brutally honest. And it's very hard because you have people who are very intelligent and very rational, even-keeled people alongside people who are slightly unhinged. And I think they found the same thing with the whole pandemic that happened. People who were hesitant to taking the medical intervention were either people who were very, very intelligent on the IQ spectrum or not so intelligent on the IQ spectrum. So there's that recalcitrance, rebelliousness on both sides of the normal distribution of intelligence, right? So if you're a couple standard deviations on either side, you're likely going to be resistant to authority to some extent, and that is why there's so few people who can maintain skepticism of the normalcy bias when everything is going well. That's why I say once a prepper, always a prepper, because there's something about, just not trusting, and there's just something about being, I was going to say socially deviant, but that's not the word, just outside the norm, outside society to some extent, outside conventional thinking that is required in order to see these things coming, which is not to say that we're special. It's not an elitist thing to say, but it is what it is. I'm not sure if I talked about this. This is the nuclear power plant at Zaporozhye. So you can see these white circles here. These are places where they fortified their positions. And this means that if the war does come to this point, that these reactors are going to draw fire. I think the reactor is in the process of shutdown. This does take a while, takes a minute. There is still power to the power plant to keep everything cool in the way that they need it to. And these reactors are hardened to, I think, anything up to like a standard artillery shell, as far as I know. They're built to withstand a direct hit by a plane. So there's likely not too much of a risk that we're going to see a radiological incident as a result of this, but you just never know. And the fact that the United States is in there with their NEST, the shadowy nuclear emergency support team, as they're called, is concerning, considering the timeline of escalation. We just made our Nuclear Timeline 2023 video. Go and check that out. Please check out the interview that we did with Dr. Peter Vincent Pry. You will not be disappointed. And just understand that this guy used to work for the CIA. Okay, he's been interviewed on valuetainment. And when he says these things, I think even I, at the time when I did this interview, I thought his timeline was a matter of months. But now it's becoming clear that the timeline that he was talking about was one perhaps measured in years and not months, in terms of Russia's strategy to deplete NATO's weapons supplies and potentially play possum and then counterstrike in a very powerful way. Okay, this is just some footage of the Polish authorities storming a Russian embassy, a school that was part of the embassy there, which I would presume was supposed to be Russian sovereign property. I'm not sure how that works in terms of international law, but of course it is no more, so we can expect a mass expulsion of diplomats, and once all the diplomats are gone, that's it. That's all. So this is a infographic. Okay, so everything in blue is the US, okay? So this is in 1980. Now let's just start the clock here. 82, 83, 85, you can't see that on the screen, but 1990, 91, 92. China is starting to spread its influence a bit. America is still very dominant. Post-2000, this is when things start to change. Look at this. These are who dominates global trade, okay? So everything in red is China is the primary trading partner. And one thing you're going to notice with this, and anything in blue, of course, is US. Anything that's this color, whatever that color is, I'm kind of colorblind, guys, so bear with me here, is, I guess, split between the two, is kind of equal, okay, kind of down the middle. But what you're going to notice is that all of the trading partners of China are the places where people are still having babies, well, with the exception of Australia, okay, where the populations are still replenishing. So China is locked in this Belt and Road Initiative for the future. They are positioned to be the global superpower. Even European countries are primarily trading with the Chinese. And this is just 2016. Let's go up to, okay, we're only at 2017 right now. So we can only imagine what this is now, 6 years later, especially with all the deals that have been done through BRICS and whatnot. So it's not looking good for the American empire. People who are saying that, well, the US dollar still has a long way to go. Yeah, but things change very quickly. Things change very quickly, and everything is fine until it isn't. So just don't be one of these people who gets overly excited about every single thing and then you lose interest. You know, you always approach things with some apprehension, even if it is like in your face, obvious SHTF level scenario. It's important to approach it with just a bit of reservation, because you don't want to burn yourself out, because this is a long process, this whole Western civilization collapse. I'm not sure if I talked about this, but Zelensky asked Commander-in-Chief Zaluzny to send military commanders from rear to contact line. Recall that was largely how the Russians were fighting this war. Russia's Crimean base was spotted empty, okay? So this is back in February. They had all these armored vehicles and stuff, and now it appears they have completely cleared out of there. Where have they gone? That is the question. Where have they gone? Are they removing that stuff because they don't want the Ukrainians to get a hold of it? Are they trying to bait the Ukrainians into something? We really don't know at this point, and I'm not on the ground there, so I personally don't have a clue. All I can glean is what I read, and a lot of open source intelligence stuff. Like I say, I don't have any special contacts or anything like that. I know some people think I do, but I mean, I do to the extent that there's some people who are close to the problem, like I said, but nothing I say is classified. This is from the Telegraph. Russian troops digging trenches in Ukraine reportedly infected with anthrax. This could come from natural environments due to, I think it's the, dying livestock and stuff like that. I'm assuming there's going to be stuff like that. Some people suspect it might be biowarfare related. Who knows? Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Canadian Prepper out.